Indochina and Vietnam into two pieces.
This is Tad Pritchett talking about his donation to the Evansville Wartime Museum. 10/7/2022.
Country in South Vietnam. And they divided it with what they called the DMZ. Now, part of the problem was that part of this agreement was that they would have free elections in the South, which never took place. And quite honestly, it was a horrible, corrupt government in the South. So as time went on, after that agreement in '54 and into the '60s, the communists decided that they needed to begin to take over South Vietnam because they certainly were not going to fulfill the obligations that they said they were going to fulfill. So they began to do that through a political structure that was in place called the Viet Cong. And everybody thought that Ho Chi Minh was in charge of it. Honestly, at this point, Ho Chi Minh in the '60s was mostly a figurehead in North Vietnam and got all the press, but the Communist Party and a guy named Lee Dawn were actually running the strategy of what was happening in South Vietnam. So by the late '60s, there was a major military operation going on in South Vietnam. So I left for the Vietnam War. It was just about this time in 1968. And I left from the old terminal, and right now I don't know which direction I'm looking, but south of us, there's this way? Okay. I don't have my compass and map, so I'm lost. I left from that terminal on an Eastern Airline flight, and there I left my young wife, my 10-month-old son, my mom, my dad, and my, at that time, little brother, Kurt, who's now turned into my big brother. But one thing, I remember two things of leaving in this battle. I remember Kurt wore one of the Marine Corps cover hats that I'd given him, and the other was, they called my flight started to leave, my wife passed out. And I had to grab my son before he hit the deck and gave him, I don't remember who I gave him to, and I headed for the airport. And I actually have my plane ticket in my display. So as replacements, this was a very individualistic solo trip that we took. It wasn't like we got on trainloads of troops and headed to Vietnam. We went by ourselves. And thinking about that trip, I can't remember one person in the whole trip that was going to Vietnam. So it was really a solo trip. The highlight of that trip for me was going through the bus station in San Francisco. I had to get a cab there and head out to Norton Air Force Base. And I was attacked by a mob of what I've always thought of as hippies, but they were anti-war protesting hippies. And honest to goodness, I thought at that point I was going to become a casualty of the war before I even got to the war. And I was saved by some guy that popped out of the woodwork, literally, put his arms around me, beat all these people off of me, took me in the bus station, and then got me a cab and put me on the cab. Honestly, I don't know if he had not shown up, what would have happened to me. But I went through Okinawa, ended up in Hoang Tree Combat Base, and I was assigned to Lima Company, L Company, 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marines, 3rd Marine Division, as an infantry platoon commander. So our area of operation for the 3rd Marine Division was along that DMZ, the dividing point between the north and the south, and then along the Laotian border, along the South Vietnam Laotian border, the west side, and it was called I Corps. That area along that border was mountainous and covered with extremely dense jungle. So that was my first operation. We went out. One thing I want to say about just the culture in Vietnam, it doesn't get a lot of press, although over the years we've got a ton of bad press. But one of the things that people don't give us credit for is the fact that if you remember the Civil Rights Act of 1965 got rid of the Jim Crow laws. So they were in effect. 2-3 years later, people like us that just gotten out of college were trying to manage this hodgepodge of integration. And I'll be honest with you, we didn't know what to call each other because we we all are here in Evansville, if we're back in those days, we remember this was a segregated city. And we didn't have good names for each other. We did not know what to call each other until somebody came up with these simple names of white and black. And I thought, good night, this person was a genius. And we finally knew how to refer to each other. And who knows what would have happened if we could have communicated around what we called each other. But it was a mess a lot of times. But somehow, I think this leadership group, and when I say leadership group, all the way down to the lowest rank, were able to somehow muddle through it and get the jobs done. And I've admired that, and I just don't think that we got enough good press out of all that. When I say we, Vietnam vets, there are roughly 3.5 million Vietnam vets. The estimates show that somewhere around 1 million to 1.25 million were in regular combat, about a third. What is interesting about veterans in general, I've met lots and lots of World War II veterans and obviously Vietnam veterans. If there were 3.5 million veterans, there are 3.5 million different stories, and nearly anything that anybody tells honestly could be true because everybody had their own perspective. All you knew was what you saw. You didn't know anything else other than here's a bush, here's a foxhole, nothing else. So everybody had stories. So we always like to contradict and discount stories that some veterans had, like, oh, that could never happen. Well, maybe it didn't happen where you were, but they could have happened. It really could have happened. So I think we need to pay attention and appreciation to all stories. So we'll take a trip back and look at the cases when we get done, and I'll explain some things. But the case shows a Marine leading a helicopter. So what I would like for you to do is think for a minute. Just you can close your eyes if you want. But think for a minute and imagine yourself looking into a large, ominous abyss. And wind is blowing like crazy in your face and blowing dust and dirt in your face. And the air is just absolutely suffocating. Your stomach is just wrapped up in this knot of fear that you've never experienced in your life. And your mind keeps telling you, this is the most godforsaken place I could have ever imagined. And it really was. This is the jungle. As you sit there and you start thinking, your confidence is searching for some morsel of experience in your past that tells you you've done this before. But that doesn't come because you haven't. And then you tell yourself, things are going to turn out okay. And then you argue and say, that doesn't help because what do you know whether it's going to turn out okay? So, but as you gaze into this shadowy chasm, is the only thing I can think of calling it. For a second there, you hesitate and you begin to lose hope. But your brain takes over and it starts screaming to your legs to get moving. And you jump out of this helicopter, but you don't know what to expect. And as you drop into this pool, you're just surrounded, permeated with this hot, suffocating sludge feeling. And this smell of sewage, Agent Orange, and rotting jungle. It's just all there in your nose, and you're just covered with it, and you seem to never get out of it. And this paralyzing terror that creeps into your skin, it just takes over everything. Your lungs will begin to gasp. Your ears are just thinking, what are these noises? And your heart is screaming, let me out of here, get me out of here. And your legs are trying to turn and run back to that helicopter, which is safety, to get back in that helicopter. But it's already too late because it's like just a giant grasshopper lifting off the ground, and there goes your safety, and you're stuck. And thank goodness for your mind, because I spent almost a year in training to go to Vietnam and to try to lead people. I always laugh because here I am going into a jungle, and we were trained in how to attack Japanese pillboxes and all these really useful things with flamethrowers. I saw a flamethrower once in Vietnam, and a person was flamethrowing, spraying weeds with it to kill it. I mean, can you imagine walking around in a park with a flamethrower on your back? But that's the kind of training we got, but at least it was supposed to be some education on how to handle yourself. So finally, my legs begin to take over, and my brain is just screaming and yelling, "Wake up, stupid, wake up. You're supposed to be a lieutenant, don't be a big baby." So this is what I'm thinking when I hop off this helicopter, my first operation in Vietnam, and I was ready to become part of the jungle for the next 2 months. Now, luckily, and some of you will say that's a lot of really great luck, 2 days before we started to go out on this operation, we were encamped outside of a combat base called An Hoa, which was outside of the jungle area, but it still was a place that got attacked all the time. We were there and we were outside the lines. And luckily, there was a firefight that went on. I got shot at, and I just trembled and shook and just lost it. And when I say lucky, because I'd already been through that once. And this time, I'm going to use this word because I can't think of any better way to describe this. I was just scared shitless, and I was so homesick, all this. But I'd been shot at once. I didn't go through that shaking. I was ready to go. In fact, it was even worse because the first night we got under attack, I jumped up and I was yelling and directing fire, and the corpsman jumped up and said, "Lieutenant, you're going to get your ass shot off. Get back down in this box." I thought, "Yeah, you're probably right, I will. I better mediate this a bit." But this display that I've got, it's a Marine display, and I call it Vietnamese or Viet Cong display. In the Marine display, if you can imagine, there's a helicopter picture in the back. It's like I'll show you, we'll go back and look at it. 2 sides in the back of a helicopter lifting off of the landing zone. And this is a picture of the very helicopter, my friends took it, that we had just jumped from. So I had just come off that helicopter, and what I'm trying to show is what it was like with all this equipment struggling off that helicopter in the middle of this landing zone. A couple of things. The boots are something I'd like for you to look at. I went through at least 2 pairs of boots. But on the boots, there's a dog tag right on the shoelace of the boot. And then, of course, we got our dog tags around our neck. We even stamped our names in some of our clothes. Now, the reason is because there were so many landmines and booby traps, it was highly likely that if you tripped one of those, you'd be blown apart. And they wanted to make sure they could match up your legs with your dog tags. So you had one of your dog tags on your foot and one around your neck. An indication of, it was always like a badge of courage to have white boots, because the more you wore them and they got wet and you scrubbed through the bush, they became white. And white was of value. A friend of mine sold his boots to an Army guy for $100 because they were broken in. They looked like this guy had been out in the jungles for months. Well, he had been for months. I think the thing that I'd like to talk about on the other display, I call it the Vietnamese or Viet Cong display. That has a lot of artifacts that I found along that Laotian border. We would go into supply caves or hospitals that the Vietnamese had built and staging for attacks later. We would go into little encampments where they'd been, and there'd be rice cooking on a fire. I have a spoon that I found in a little rice bowl. One time we went into a little place and there were some hooches that they built, a little fire going, and a clothesline. And there were women's clothes hanging on the clothesline. And all of a sudden I look over, do you know what it looks like to be in a jungle and you see 18-year-old kids running around in bras? Is that something you would expect to see? These kids had grabbed all the bras off the clothesline and put them around, and they're running around, you know, dancing and everything. It was, honestly, it was a riot. It kind of was a break in the monotony of what was going on. It's also obvious with that issue and the fact that I have some women's clothing there that there were both women and men in the North Vietnamese Army and the Viet Cong, and they were out there in the jungle just like everybody else. So the Viet Cong, you know, they were a political branch of the North Vietnamese Army and of Communist North Vietnam. But one thing I wanted to show you were some of the friends that we had out in the jungles, because I divided my artifacts in the Marine case into things that we use to protect us from the enemy, which are obvious, and then things we had to use to protect us against the jungle, because each of those are equally deadly. For instance, I hope this doesn't disappoint anybody, but do you know Tony the Tiger does not bring out any cereal when he's creeping around your lines at night in the jungle. He also gets really, really mad when you throw something and try to scare him away to the point where you kind of think he's going to eat you. So we ran into tigers, a lot of apes that like to throw things at us. One of my favorites. Okay, this is Sally the snake. And Sally was a sleaze. But Sally would sneak in bed with you at night when you're late in the jungle and snooze away. And she was so quiet that I can't tell you how many days, I'm going to say wake up, because you really never wake up, you never really are asleep. But I'll wake up and I pick up my blanket that's laying on the ground. And here's old Sally laying there smiling with buck teeth, you know. So there are lots and lots of these things. If people tell you stories about snakes, it is really true. Now these, to me, are even worse than snakes. Vietnam jungles have the biggest spiders on Earth. They have to have. We dig in every night. That's one thing the Marines did differently. We made sure we dug a foxhole every night wherever we were. Almost every night we'd dig up a spider or something this big. It's a little creepy. To me, the worst things were centipedes. Now, this is a baby centipede because the centipedes in the jungles can get up to like a foot and a half long, as big around as maybe two of your fingers. And the interesting thing about these legs is that, yeah, there are 100 legs, maybe, but they have poison tips on them. And one will creep up on you at night. Well, first of all, you couldn't tell when they ran around in the jungle whether they're snakes or not, and you didn't want to turn on a flashlight. But so many times I put out listening posts outside of the lines, and they'd come back in the morning, and they'd have these red trails all across their face where these centipedes would crawl around in their face. So these are the kind of things, along with just the normal mosquitoes and things, that you really just had to protect yourself from all of them. Now, one thing I've got on my display is a QR code, and it connects to my website. And what I'm trying to do is update it with videos and extra pictures and things. I've got a couple on there, but I haven't done a whole lot on it yet. So, I guess the point of being together today is this, that in the spring of 1961, when we were seniors, all the young men in our class had a decision they had to make, and it had to do with a military draft. And you couldn't ignore it. You may say, I'm going to go to college, or I'm going to do this or that, but you couldn't ignore the fact that you had to purposely do something. It was a huge life decision. It was in the middle of the Cold War against the communists, and of course that's still going on. And 1 month before we graduated, there was the Bay of Pigs fiasco. So, nobody knew exactly what was going to happen at any point. And there was this little country called Vietnam that just kept creeping in the news, but nobody paid it any attention because nobody had ever heard of it, quite honestly. So throughout all of the 1960s, our classmates stepped up and joined the military in some form, either with the branches of the service, the reserves, National Guard, or whatever. But many, many of our classmates joined the military. And that's why I want to dedicate my display to the veterans of the class of 1961 from Bosse. Now, finally, as a couple of personal notes, I want to thank my wife, Dee, who can't be here, but she helped me design and build this display. And Alan and Donna Lewis have been great in helping out. And then Dick Kuhn, that you met already, and I guess Richard Hawkinson is maybe not here today, but he's the facility manager. They both were great at helping me get this thing set up. So I guess as a kind of a final note, and then I'll ask if you have any questions. People often ask me, would I ever go back to Vietnam, or would I like to go back and be a tourist or whatever? And quite honestly, up till now, my answer has always been the same, and that was, why would I want to go back? I've never left. I've never left. But I have to tell you that this display has honestly brought me back home to the very spot where this odyssey started in the old facility. I mean, it's just kind of amazing to me. And that was 54 years ago, but honestly, I feel like now I'm back home. And that's why this display is so important to me, that I feel like I've actually come back home now. So thank you so much for coming and sharing my experience and my display. And I'd like to know if anybody have any questions?
I'll bring it back to you.
My name is Linda. I just wanted to know, you said Agent Orange had a smell. What did that smell like?
It smells like, you can imagine just dead vegetation because it killed everything. And it had a stench of, you smelled it and you knew it's some kind of an insecticide. We knew it was a pesticide, but if you go out and just spray a pesticide and smell it, you could smell it, you could identify that. So that's what it smelled like, but we didn't know anything was bad about it. We slept in it. I remember they would spray the jungles with these big cargo planes, I think they're C-123s, I think. And we'd just have it all over us, just sprayed all over us. But it's funny that you asked me, and I can hardly put it in words. All I can say is it smelled like Roundup. I think Roundup used to have some of the same chemicals, so it smelled kind of like Roundup. It just mixed in with that dead vegetation. Thank you, it's a good question. I never thought about that.
Other questions?
Okay. Well, if there are no questions, maybe we could walk back to the display and I can show you what it looks like and kind of explain some things on it. Again, thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate it. I'm going to get my insects back, and I'm going to eventually put it in the case. Any more stupid questions? The display is right back here in the corner. Yeah. You what?
That's where he finished. He started off
That's all right. I was going to make sure it didn't fall. I've had that happen to cameras before, and they are no more.
I saw a Michael Fry. Emailing it.
And had sea rice.
Yeah, watch your step. Watch your step, everybody. Sorry.
You got about 7 or 8 feet.
Do I? Okay. Yeah, come on, Chris.
You want the tripod?
No, it's okay. Thank you.
Oh, man. I was just a K-bar for that. Speaking of that, there's a K-bar that I used in Vietnam and brought back. And these are jungle gloves. And quite honestly, they were only issued for a short period of time. I think they might have almost been an experiment because very few people have those, believe it or not. They're made of nylon. And what happens is you think about going up and down jungle trail or whatever, an awful lot of it is grabbing things. And you're cutting your hands all the time. And what happens to it? You don't have medical help much. You get infected like overnight when you're in the jungle. There's all this stuff in it that gets in it. So these things kept our hands safe, believe it or not. They're wonderful. Why? They only showed up for like a year at the most, and then I just never seen them anyplace. That's the watch that I wore. And you can see I got sea rations, and I had a razor. I was able to get it out one time. It's got a lot of dirt in it. Interesting story to me on hygiene. You know, you have to ask yourself, where do you shower when you're living in a poncho and poncho liner for 2 months in the jungle? Well, luckily, it was the monsoon, so it rained for like 2 straight weeks. So we collected water and we're washing ourselves off. Also, luckily, we'd run patrols and we walked through a lot of jungle streams and everything. So everybody would always stop and, try to splash the water in their face. But what never happened was you never got a haircut and you just couldn't shave. I mean, who wants to shave with cold water and a dull razor? Nobody does. I remember after being out in this situation for 2 months and I had lost my utility jacket. You can't see it, but it's a camouflaged jacket underneath. We went to finally have a real meal in a mess hall in this combat base in Anwar. So this other lieutenant and I go in. We don't have the cover. We have t-shirts because we wear green t-shirts all the time. Actually had on these boots, and we walked in, and both of us were immediately attacked by this colonel, that bird colonel. And he walks up and gets this far in front of me. It's like he's going to choke. He goes, "Are you a lieutenant? Are you an officer?" I said, "Yes, sir." And he says, "Where's your uniform?" I said, "I lost it out in the jungle." He goes, "Well, you're on record," or whatever he said. I don't know, he threatened us, and I never heard any more about it, but to this day it sticks in my mind that if you're going to stick somebody out in the jungle, at least let them come back and have a decent meal. That's all I thought about.
And
But
don't put shiny bars on their head either.
that's right, exactly.
Nice target.
Exactly. Let's see, what else is there that this, you see this cover, Marines call hats cover, so I say cover, it's a cover. This, we call this a bush cover because we wore it out in the bush. That's what we call it when we're out in the jungles. You see there are things like hand grenade pins, and I even had a pin out of a smoke grenade that I have in there. But everybody would wear these. You hated to wear these things, like helmets, because they're so hot and heavy. You had to make the Marines wear these when they needed to wear them. And sometimes on patrols, they would have to wear them, longer patrols than just maybe a day. The other thing you had to make people wear, this still, I understand why, because it's so hot and humid, you had to make them wear a flak jacket all the time. I don't know how much this thing weighs, but if you put that together with all this equipment, you know, it was like 80, 85, maybe 90 pounds of stuff, and that doesn't include any extra clothes, food, or any personal things like that. So it was a lot just to carry around those trails when you'd have to move from one spot to another. But when you went out on a patrol, it was great because you left all that, and you almost had to kill these young Marines to wear a flak jacket. They just didn't want to do it.
Well, I'm glad you showed me what a flak jacket is, because my husband said he never wore his. He sat on it when he went over the helicopter, because if the economy were firing up and you get your butt shot if you weren't sitting on your flak jacket.
Yeah, yeah. That, I never saw anybody get shot in the butt, but that was the rumor, that's right. The other thing that everybody always criticized me for, I had this in a helicopter in another museum in the city, and the M16 was like this, pointing to the ceiling. Well, people criticized me because they said, no, you don't do that. You'll shoot a hole through the engine or something. You got to point it down. Well, the problem is if you point it down and you got to look out the window and shoot at somebody, or you don't want your weapon stuck down the bottom of the floor, you know, you got to have it up here so you can use it. So, but I got a lot of what I call stupid flack over that. So anyway, these are all the things. Oh, gas mask. Everybody got a gas mask. The first thing everybody threw away when they got to the jungle was the gas mask. Now, when I finally got out of the bush, it was like halfway through my tour, and officers would take half their time out in the field, and then the other half in some kind of support job or back in the S3 or something like that. I was on a convoy, and it was like a week after I got out of the field and had no gas mask. We got ambushed in a Jeep and gassed. So I was the junior first lieutenant. The other two guys had graduated from school 1 month before me, so they were my senior. We had 2 gas masks. They grabbed the 2 gas masks, and I had to take give it this, and I pleaded myself, don't throw your gas mask away next time. There's some tripwires and hand grenades and things that we used, and that's my plane ticket back here in the back. But we all carried laws, extra rocket launchers, extra mortar rounds for the mortars. We carried extra machine gun ammunition for the machine guns. So it was a lot of weight. Okay, these are my I call them my Viet Cong relics. But this black uniform,
Yeah.
I found this in a cave along the ocean border. But they always talked about the VC or the Viet Cong wearing black pajamas all the time. That's what they look like, the tops. The rice bowl, and here's the spoon that I found in that village. I found one was this North Vietnamese billfold, and just some different things. They had sweaters, because it really gets cold in the jungle after when the sun goes down. There's this I found is a Vietnamese woman's, I forgot what the dao, or I always forget how to pronounce it, that I found someplace. Now, I didn't carry all these things around with me. What you can do is you can ship them back to the rear, and they would keep things for you. And then you got back, you could send them home by, usually by mail, U.S. mail. On the walls, I've got pictures of different things like, remember it was a French colony, there were French bunkers we ran into. There's a Vietnamese graveyard along the DMZ. The elevation along the DMZ in the eastern part, I think, was 0. I can't remember what it was exactly, but they had to bury their relatives, their dead, above ground and then cover them up with a mound. So I've got a picture of that up here you kind of look through. Some of these propaganda brochures I found here, I just found them out in the jungle and they were out throwing them. so the troops could find them. One of them even says, "Yankee, come home." And I thought maybe it was something left over from World War II, where they always would say, "What, Yanks go home," or something. I forgot what that was they said. They were just laying out in the jungle. And then there's here it is. My prize. There's a little bamboo flute back here. And we had with us what we called Kit Carson's Kit Carson Scouts. And generally what they were North Vietnamese soldiers that decided they wanted to give up. And they call that Chu Hoi. They're Chu Hois. And they'd walk in, they go, Chu Hoi, Chu Hoi. And if they gave us some kind of weapon, they got extra benefits from it. Now, with this, we had 2 of them, and they're the nicest little guys. I mean, when I say little guys, it was like they were little kids. Like, they may have been 15 or 16 years old. And one night, one of them, he came up to me and said, in broken English, "Lieutenant, I want my hair to look like, I have blonde hair here." I'm so used to hair. Oh, no, I didn't. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, okay, sorry I brought that one up. So he said, I want my hair to look like his. And his kid had blonde hair. So the corpsman said, "I got this. I know how to," he didn't say, "I got this, but I know how to do this. I've got peroxide, and we will bleach his hair out, and he'll look just like," I think his name is, I can't remember his name, but put all that peroxide on his head, and he's just so happy, just, thank you, I'm going to look just like Americans. Well, the trouble was his hair was so black, it turned bright red. And he looked like a rooster. Nobody would give him a mirror to look. So we said, "Oh, that looks great. That looks great." So in appreciation, he got a piece of bamboo and he whittled out a flute. And there it is. It's been kind of crushed over the years. He could actually play it. And he carves it all out and he says, "Gift to son." So that was his gift to my son. So there it is right here in my case. One last thing. If you look at this picture, it's got 3 sides, right? That is all one picture. This is the helicopter I got off of, landing down here. And this is supposedly me meandering off in my 2-month adventure out in the jungle. So anybody have any questions on anything you see, or just want to kind of sit around and look at it? Okay. Oh, yeah.
How come people didn't want to wear the flak jacket? The flak jacket or
Flak
jacket?
Way too hot and way too heavy.
Is it a vest or does it have sleeves or?
No, see here, it's a vest.
Okay.
And I would say that you can hold it, but I
So
think
it's
that-
just heavy.
it's just really, really heavy.
Is it like waterproof or having
No,
Or
hold
tech- bulletproof? Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
right, they could shoot your arms off, but they wouldn't get.
Your vital organs. Okay.
My platoon sergeant, we were talking about this, and he said, "I think the Army has better flak jackets than we do." I said, "Why do you think that?" He said, "Well, ours came out of the 50s, and theirs are new." So he took a Marine Corps flak jacket and an Army flak jacket. Now, they were really lightweight and flexible. He took them out and shot them with an M16. It didn't go through this, it didn't go through the Army one either. And he said, "Let's go to the Army supply and we're going to get ourselves 2 Army jackets." So I ditched my Marine flak jacket, or an Army flak jacket. And for a while, some of the Marines thought I was an Army guy that had been attached to their company somehow and had no authority. But as a second lieutenant, I didn't have any authority anyway. So just take a look. If you have anybody else have a question?
I did.
Yeah.
That fancy cell phone. How far could you communicate with that?
Okay, that's actually not a cell phone, My radio man carried the big PRC 25, I think it was, 26, something like that, 25. And depending on where you were, it was easily a couple of miles, when I say easily. But that had to be flat terrain right directly to somebody. There were many times, I couldn't talk to somebody from here to that region over there because it's like something just sucked the airway, the signal down. And everything was mountainous and all kinds of vegetation, so you know you couldn't expect to go very far. But it was our only connection to humanity.
Which rifles do you like the best? M1, M14, or M16?
I have an M1.
M1 is heavy, accurate.
Yeah.
It's better than the M14 and the M16.
Well, I think it was really a good rifle. My problem with it was it weighed too much. And I kept getting my thumb stuck in it when I tried to load it. In fact, I still have I thought, well, you know, I'm not going to torture my thumb. I'm going to use my finger. Well, I also now have a finger with a big permanent bump on it where I got it. So you're right, it's a very good weapon.
Yeah, it's very
But, man,
that
M16's
M14, 16 jam with sand blew in it or anything like that.
Yeah.
They were known to jam on it.
Yeah. But the M16 was notorious for that. You had to spend a lot of time cleaning it. I've got a picture of me cleaning my rifle, but I don't know whether put it in there now. No. But you're right. You had to be really careful. There was so much you had to make sure the magazine was ready. You couldn't load the magazine full of 20 rounds. You had to back off to 19, and sometimes better even 8. But man, I'd hate to carry an M1 around in those jungles.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's it.
you couldn't move it. The thing good about an M16 was that it was lightweight, and you could easily move it around. So it was a good weapon for what we used it for. It was extremely difficult to maintain. It really was. I had a flash suppressor when I got there. I got one of the older M16s. Oh, and they're all fully automatic. If you ever shot an M16 fully automatic, it is so much fun.
About an M50 or M60.
That was fun too.
That was good.
My
Some of them
favorite-
got hung on it.
Yeah.
They couldn't get off of it.
That's true. Okay, I think I'm out of I got plenty of stories, but you know, each minute was a story. Any other question, Pete? Oh yeah, that was a good weapon. Now that one won't fire very well because it's a movie prop and it's made out of plastic or something.
That AK?
AK-47 was a really good weapon. No. This flash suppressor, I was going to mention that. When I got there, I had a flash suppressor that had 3 prongs on it. Now, the benefit of that was when you walked around, you got caught up in every possible tree, bush, or whatever. So that's why they went to this birdcage flash suppressor on the end of a rifle. The good thing about the 3-prong was that I could open up a box of sea rations with it because they had a wire band around the case, and I could put that on there, and I was an immediate value to my platoon. And I will tell you that is the only value I lent for a long time. So I've got this little plaque made up, and Dick is going to be kind enough to put it up there someplace, but it says, dedicated to the veterans of the Bosse High class of 1961, thank you for my freedom. And I truly mean that. Anybody that went into the military, any branch or whatever, I just thank you so much for my freedom. Thank you. And I can't tell you how much it means to me to have all you come out here today. I really can. I really do appreciate this. So I'm going to turn this over to Dave.
Thank you. We're so happy that you allow us to exhibit your treasures, and hopefully they'll be here for a long time. And thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very good. Good job. How are you?